Good morning, Clinton College family, our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends. My name is Dr. Tony McNeil. I serve as professor of music and worship at Clinton College in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And I want to welcome you to today's virtual Beacon Forum. The purpose of our Beacon Forum series is to bring together our campus community each week from 11 a.m. to 12 noon for a dedicated time of inspiration, education, and fellowship. Beacon Forum exposes our Clinton family to a variety of thought leaders, change agents, creatives, and innovators who embody one or more of our core values, which are scholarship, servant leadership, social change, and spirituality. Beacon Forum gives us an opportunity to have meaningful conversations with each other and with professionals who look like where we're going, people who are already doing the work that we hope our students will do in the world. So at a particular point toward the end of today's program, we will have a time of Q&A between our campus minister, who is sitting in for our president, Dr. Jarrett Fright, and our guest presenter today, Dr. Matthew Williams. We are delighted to have him with us today as our speaker. Dr. Williams is the president of the Interdenominational Theological Center located in Atlanta, Georgia, and he will be formally introduced a little later by one of our students. So thank you for being here. We hope that you will continue to support Clinton College, follow us on social media, and pay special attention to the things that we have going on the website, especially with our new course offerings and minors that are being developed by our new academic dean, Dr. Tonice Randolph. Check those out. And one of those minors is a minor in Black sacred music and worship. So we're very excited about releasing that next fall. Actually, we'll start teaching classes in that particular minor in the spring, but formally we'll launch the certificate and the minor in the fall. So let us know if you're interested in that or any of the programs. Right now, we are going to move forward in our Beacon Forum series for today with a rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing by Atlanta-based independent artist Choreology.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. So let us march on till victory is won. Bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn and died. But yet with the steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary, God of our silence, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way. Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light to keep us forever on the path we pray. Bless our feet, straight from the places, our God, where we met thee. Bless our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand. True to our God, true to our native land. Yeah, true to our God, true to our native land. Oh, da da da, true to our God, our native land.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Good morning, Clinton family and friends. My name is Tamiko Coleman, and I come to you all the way from Staten Island, New York, in the Big Apple. I am a Bear student as well as a global studies student in religious studies. Let us pray this morning. Most holy and everlasting Father, we thank you. We thank you for this time, this space, and this opportunity. Time that we can get together and fellowship and share in the motivation listening of the ideas that's brought to us by Clinton College. So, Father, I ask that you come now, be a part of this fellowship service, be a part of all that we are here to do today. Father, I ask that you bless each and every person that is on this service tonight, this morning. Father, I ask that you bless all those that cannot be here this morning. Just give us all one big hug in Jesus' name. Amen.
This in my soul, praise in my Savior, all the day long. This in my soul, this in my soul, praising my Savior, all the day long. This is my story.
Good morning, Clinton College family and friends. My name is Cynthia Gaston, and I'm a religious studies major in the BEAR program. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker to Beacon Forum today. Dr. Matthew Wesley Williams is the 11th president of the Interdenominational Theological Center, ITC, founded in 1958. The ITC is an ecumenical, historically Black graduate theological school located in the heart of Atlanta University Center. ITC's mission is to cultivate leaders who commit to practice justice and peace through a liberating and transformative spirituality. Dr. Williams is a recognized executive in the field of theological education who has built national programs and partnerships among top-level leaders to advance opportunities for institutional change, faculty development, doctoral education, leadership formation, young adult vocational discernment, diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. Before his appointment to ITC, Dr. Williams was the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Forum for Theological Exploration, FTE, a national leadership incubator that cultivates wise, faithful, and courageous leaders who make a difference in the world through the church and academy. During his tenure at Morehouse School of Medicine and FTE, he also served as the pastor at First African Presbyterian Church in Lithonia, Georgia. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from the Interdenominational Theological Center, 2004, in Atlanta. He also holds 2 bachelor's degrees in psychology and philosophy and religion from Florida A&M University, 1998. He is an ordained ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church, USA, a sought-after strategist, consultant, and facilitator. Dr. Williams is a thriving cancer survivor committed to utilizing his academic, activist, and pastoral background in the spirit of Ella Baker, who observed, "I have always thought that what is needed is the development of people who are interested not in being leaders as much as in developing leadership in others." He co-authored a book on leadership and change, published in January 2020 with Chalice Press, entitled Another Way, Living and Leading Change on Purpose. Originally from Chicago, Dr. Williams resides in Atlanta, in the Atlanta metropolitan area with his wife Alexis and children Zuri and Sage. Let us welcome Dr. Matthew Wesley Williams.
Good morning, Clinton family. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you this morning during this Clinton Forum. During this Beacon Forum, a very important opportunity for the Clinton family to come together and to learn together, to discuss together the meaning of the stuff that matters. And for that, I want to give a shout out to the visionary leadership of your president, my dear brother and friend, President Lester McCorn. Of course, to my dear brother, Dr. Tony McNeil, to Reverend Gaston, thank you for that kind introduction. To Minister Fight, to Dr. Fight, Minister Coleman, good to be with you today. And again, to the whole Clinton family, God bless you, and it's good to be with you. I am, one of the reasons that I'm thrilled to be with you is that although this is my first time with you, I feel like we are kinfolk. Precisely because we are aligned. Our institutions, the Interdenominational Theological Center and Clinton College, are very much aligned in terms of how we understand the outcomes and the impact of education, your core values, scholarship, social change, spirituality, and servant leadership are very much aligned with how we understand our mission, which you heard around cultivating women and men who we call prophetic problem solvers, who practice justice and peace through a liberating and transforming spirituality. And so it's good to be with you. When I call you Clinton family, I mean Clinton family. It's good to be with you. And so in service to the catalyzing of a conversation, which is what I hope this opportunity does, knowing that we won't tell it all in this hot hour that we have together. But my hope is that it will catalyze some conversation and reflection around this issue of servant leadership, and more particularly leadership. I want to focus in on that and use as a theme for our talk and time together, liberating leadership. Liberate.
I'm not sure what's going on with Dr. Williams's signal. Hopefully it will come back. Let's give it a couple of seconds. Technology is a thing. Oh my goodness. And this can happen. Let's wait and see. Dr. Williams' signal will recalibrate and he can come back on and continue his speech. Okay. Maybe he signed off. Okay. And will probably be back with us very shortly. Okay, I think we have Dr. Williams back. There he is. Thank you so much for rejoining us, my friend. You may
Absolutely.
continue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your patience. We had a sudden power outage. One of the hazards of our dependence in these times on technology. But again, I'm glad to be with you and glad to be back with you. I'm glad we got that solved that quickly. So let's return to the subject at hand. And today, again, I want to take the time that we have for this talk to focus on this theme, liberating leadership. And when we talk about liberating leadership, that phrase, that term has a double meaning. One, it has to do with leadership that liberates, leadership that takes on the task of confronting and dismantling oppression. But not only that, but cultivating conditions for freedom and liberation, right? So a leadership that liberates. But then liberating leadership also has to do with liberating our conventional notions of leadership that expand our imagination around what leadership is, what it does, and what it requires of us, so that we might live more fully into the various ways that God has called us to lead with our diverse and particular gifts and in the diverse and particular contexts in which we serve. So as a way of moving into this topic, I want to invite you into my own life and highlight two spaces that were formative for me in my own early development and imagination around what leadership is and what leadership means. And my first has to do with my family, where I was born and raised. I am a child of the Great Migration. My great grands and grandparents from Yazoo County, Mississippi, from Maury County, Tennessee, from Alabama, and even got a great grandfather from Ireland. But all of those trails tracked to the south side of Chicago, that branch of the African diaspora that we call the South Side. That's where I was born and raised. And in that milieu, I was born to two parents who met as student organizers with an economic justice project of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the North called Operation Breadbasket, that at the time was led by Jesse Lewis Jackson Jr., who went on to evolve that organization into what is now known as Rainbow Push, but it was then called Operation Push. They met as student organizers downstate Illinois on a hunger campaign. And so from the outset, I was raised in a home where there was no distinction between spirituality and social justice, right? That Jesus and justice were intertwined in a way that they could not be extricated from one another, right? That what it meant to be faithful was also what it meant to be active in the work of justice and peacemaking. And so that I can't stress enough. Be a follower in the way of Jesus, right? So that's my home, that's my family, that's what I was born into. But then there's also, I also want to say a word about the place not only where I was born into life, but the place where I was born into ministry, and that is my home church back home, Trinity United Church of Christ, where I first discovered and answered my call to ministry at the age of 15. And that church, under the leadership of legendary master preacher, Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., every first Sunday during communion, when we were about to take communion and we're examining ourselves and we're doing our communion confession, in our communion confession, we confessed there is no task more sacred than the liberation of Black people. And God has called us to this task. I was called into ministry in a context that understood the liberation of Black people as a sacred task, no less sacred than any other task to which anyone called by God is called to. And so it's important to understand that I come to this conversation about leadership and liberating leadership in particular through a particular slice of the Black church we call the prophetic tradition, that operates at this intersection between spirituality, justice and liberation, but also the life of the mind. My parents were student organizers, right? And so this intersection between the purpose of intellectual exploration and inquiry and the life of the mind and education, justice and liberation, and spirituality, all of those pieces come together to really form who I am and how I understand the world. Right. So again, I discovered my sense of call in this context out of that family, my family of origin in that church family. Now, James Baldwin has a way of saying things very succinctly, if you've ever read him, that brings things into focus. And he says, the price one pays for the pursuit of any vocation is an intimate knowledge of its ugly side. I mentioned I was called into ministry at the age of 15, and it didn't take long for me to understand that this prophetic, noble tradition of justice and peacemaking that I was called into and out of was a vocation, a path, a tradition that had both its nobility but also its troublesome dimensions. And I tell this story about my trial sermon. At the age of 15, preached a sermon called Lions, Bears, and Giants. And my God, it was awful. But the grace of that congregation and my pastor encouraged me in that moment. And I preached about a 10-minute sermon on where David said, God has delivered me from lions and bears. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Talked about overcoming obstacles. And afterwards, I closed my Bible and I was following the liturgy. After the sermon, we would typically gather our things in the pulpit and then walk down that blood red aisle, that blood red carpet, to the door of the church where folk would exit out of the sanctuary into the chilly rigors of Black life on the south side of Chicago. And there we would give the benediction, and then the receiving line would take place. Well, I began to follow the ritual, follow the liturgy. And as I was gathering my things and beginning to move onto the middle aisle, my pastor put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Hold on, Matt." I thought, man, did I do something wrong? This was my first time doing this. I thought I had done something wrong. He said, "No, hold on." And with his right hand, he motioned to the usher and told the usher to come here. And the head usher came down the middle aisle, and she had a garment in her hand right over her forearm. And she came down that middle aisle and handed Pastor his cape. And if you're in if you are out of a Baptist tradition, you know that there's a sacred vestment called a cape that sometimes pastors will wear after preaching. And so he took his cape and he put his cape on my shoulders. Congregation went up in praise as a way of affirming that the faith had been transmitted to another generation, that God had called a young man at that early age. But let me tell you, on the receiving end of that cape, it felt both like a weight and a warm blanket. And in retrospect, as I've been thinking about that initiation into a tradition, what I recognize is since that time, I've been wrestling with the tension between what was placed on me and what God placed in me in terms of a call to ministry. Now, this tension has everything to do with this tradition that we're operating out of. And what I came to experience actually over time in this noble tradition is a kind of grind that requires of us a martyrdom in order to prove our faithfulness and our effectiveness. James Baldwin said the price that one pays for the pursuit of a vocation, again, is an intimate knowledge of the ugly side. But part of the ugly side of this noble tradition is the idea that heroic individuals can save a whole people, right? Part of the ugly side of this vocation within this tradition is this idea that somehow liberating leadership is about the special individuals who come along and most times celebrated for their speaking gifts, for their ability to articulate ideas and help other folks imagine through their use of the word as a weapon. That somehow is sufficient for the work that we have to do to change society as we know it, to more appropriately and more accurately approximate what we know as the kingdom of God, or what Dr. King would call beloved community. And what I came to see over time as I began to mentor others is that young people who are entering into this tradition, who felt called to Jesus and justice, were wrestling with the same thing. I had one young woman tell me, she said, sometimes I feel like I have to prove I will kill myself in order for folk to take me seriously and think I'm faithful, right? There's a performative element to this that comes out of what I call a martyr myth. A martyr myth. Now, some of this martyr myth is connected to the ways in which in contemporary times we have heralded and heroized Martin Luther King, I think. Dr. King is kind of a model, not only that the church has lifted up, but the larger culture has lifted up in a sanitized way that celebrates his martyrdom as a noble moment. But what it does is it depoliticizes not only the fact that he was assassinated, but who assassinated him and why. And I'm afraid we do the same thing with Jesus. We do the same thing with Jesus. We have depoliticized Jesus's death, blamed it all on a predetermined plan by providence. But we fail to recognize that Jesus did not just die, Jesus was killed. He was executed by state-sponsored violence, right? And so while we need to give God the credit for resurrection, we've got to hold Rome accountable for the crucifixion. And failure to do so puts us in a mind of messianic leadership where we think we have to kill ourselves to be faithful. Now, here's the danger of that, is that any movement for justice, for peace, any movement for liberation that depends on a single individual, whether they live or die, whether they flourish or they fail, any movement that depends on a single individual is destined to be unsustainable and unsuccessful. Any movement that allows you to pinpoint the one that you have to kill, the one that you have to take out, the one that you have to discredit in order to bring it to a demise, any movement dependent on that is destined for failure. It has a personal toll not only on the hero, but on the community that hero, even with the noblest intentions, intends to serve. And so and let me just say about the personal toll of this, is that in my own life, I experienced trying to work out of this what I consider to be a toxic model of leadership. In my own life, I experienced burnout over and over and over again. It came to a point where I said, God, there's got to be another way. This cannot be the life that you've called me to in ministry and service. There's got to be another way. And what I began to discover, and what began to discover me, were alternative paths. Not that I discovered, but actually, again, they discovered me. These are paths that are well worn in our traditions of social justice leadership from a faith-rooted grounding. Paths of leadership that are not about a hero, but paths of leadership that are about healers. paths that are not just about public speaking, but paths that are about public listening, right? Paths that are not just about individuals, but paths for leadership that are about the whole of a community and giving a community access to its own capacities to heal, to adapt, to co-create. So I want to fast forward a little bit, certainly in interest of our time, and fast forward to how this is beginning to show up at ITC, at the Interdenominational Theological Center. We've experimented with these ideas. I've experimented with these ideas with colleagues over a long period of time, trying to create pathways for folks to be able to explore alternative models of leadership that are effective, that are sustainable, and ultimately get us where we're trying to go, not just in fighting back against the status quo, but in co-creating alternatives to the status quo that more approximate what we mean when we talk about the kingdom of God or beloved community. And at ITC, we talk about this model of liberating leadership as an educational aim toward cultivating prophetic problem solvers. Prophetic problem solvers. Now, where does that come from? Well, first, it comes from an educational philosophy that holds that education is the process by which a community builds its capacity to solve its problems and co-create its future. I'm going to say that again. Education is the process by which a community builds its capacity to solve its problems and co-create its future. Mind you, I did not say that education is the process by which an individual goes to obtain a degree in order to get a job and get money. That's training. Education is the process by which a community, listen, that means that you got to Clinton College. Every one of us got to where we are because somebody, even if it wasn't our family of origin, somebody made it possible for us to be where we are because they see something in us and require something of us, right? And what they require of us is to bring back our gifts for the benefit, not just of our own individual self-serving needs and aspirations, but for the benefit of the whole community that made it possible for us to be here in the first place. Now, what this idea of education is in many ways an antidote to what Carter G. Woodson called miseducation. Carter G. Woodson said that the miseducation of the Negro has to do with the ways in which we've internalized the values and the imagination of the very slave owners, the very oppressors who benefit from us thinking of ourselves too small, but also benefit from us not being interested in the betterment of our own well-being. And so we get educated away from our own self-interests. So miseducation in many ways, he talks about miseducation being that process by which we are educated toward the interests of others, as opposed to bringing back our gifts to actually solve the flesh and blood problems that face our people. And so this notion of prophetic problem solving, it expands on the historic focus on prophetic preaching, which is necessary but ultimately insufficient. It expands on that notion that to be prophetic is just about speech. It actually expands on that notion to suggest that to be prophetic has to do not just with speech, but also with sight. Has to do with how you see, then how you think, then how you act. So let me unpack this thing we call prophetic problem solving. And I want to point to a couple practices involved in prophetic problem solving, and then come to a close and invite conversation, again, in the interest of our time. So prophetic, again, historically, we've thought about that as what we call speaking truth to power. And may I say parenthetically, I can't stand that phrase, because speaking truth to power, that preposition to suggests that power exists someplace else, What are we imagining about where power is, right? But to be prophetic has to do with engaging a theologically informed imagination of an alternative to the status quo, in which we are living out God's dream for our lives. And in so doing, we by reflex call out the lie of white supremacy and other forms of oppression, the way in which those systems constrain the possibilities of our lives, right? So the prophetic is first about imagination, and imagination is first an act of self-imagining, the process of discovering one's true self in relationship to the creator, to the community, and to the creation as a whole, right? And so what the prophetic calls for is a practice of rereading reality, of literacy. Liberating leadership requires liberating literacy, right? Rereading our reality. My friend, the Reverend Renee August, who's an Anglican priest and a veteran of the apartheid struggle in South Africa, she says, what you are able to read, meaning what you're able to see when you read, depends on where you're reading from and who you're reading with. And I declare, we read sacred literature the same way we read social life. There's a text I would love to unpack, which we typically call the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And I'm reminded of a time when Renee August and I walked together on Robben Island, where Mandela was imprisoned along with other political prisoners in South Africa for 27 years. And she talked about the way that they turned Robben Island into what they call Robben University, even under the gaze of oppressors and apartheid, began to use their hard labor and lime quarries on that island to develop in themselves leadership skills, political acumen, and more knowledge of history and how to unstabilize or destabilize these systems. And she used that space on Robben Island to talk about the parable of the talents, where we have been taught typically, if you remember that parable, where we get that phrase, you've been faithful over few things, I'll make you ruler over many. She walks us back through that text where it talks about a landowner who called his slaves, doulos, his slaves to him. And as he was about to go on a trip, he gave them each some money and told them to invest it and bring it back to me later. He went off, came back from his trip. And when he came back from his trip, the first servant said, I've gone and doubled your money. Landowner said, I'm pleased with you. The second one said, I've gone and invested out and I've come back with more as well. He said, I'm pleased with you. The third one said, I buried what you gave me. I don't have anything more for you than you gave back to me. He resisted the slave owner's instructions. But we've been taught in Sunday school religion to think of that third one as the unfaithful one, because in our reading of that text, I was taught as a kid that the landowner was a stand-in for God. But listen to what the so-called unfaithful one said to that landowner. He said, you are a hard man who reaps where you do not sow. He talked about him as an unjust man. And how is it that we've attributed to God the traits and the attributes of something that's alien to God's nature? But somehow, reading through and reading from the perspective of the slave owner, we've read against our own interests. When we reread the text, it allows us to reread our lives in a way where we begin to ask ourselves some questions like, well, what systems of oppression are we colluding with? And what systems of oppression are we facing back and resisting? How are we colluding and how are we resisting? Is the slave owner pleased with us? Or is God pleased with us? Because I would submit that the God I serve is not pleased with the interests of the slave owner. And so the way we position ourselves in relationship to the text has everything to do with how we read even our lives and where we're reading from and who we're reading with. So reading and literacy is one piece. The second piece I want to pose is that being a prophetic problem solver, building the capacity of a community, not just to imagine alternatives, but then to co-create and incarnate alternatives is what a problem solver is all about. And it's not a matter of individuals coming in, swooping in and bringing solutions. It's about problem solvers being engaged in the work of prophetic listening to hear the desires, the capacities, the skills, the gifts, the imagination of a community well enough to be able to picture it and display it back to that community, to have them gain access to their own collective intelligence and wisdom and capacity to co-create an alternative future. That's design work. That's the work of coming together out of that imagination, not just to push back against what other folks have done and to run in that maze. That's important, but actually to incarnate the alternative to what is. That's a harder work. And that's not the work of an individual. That is the work of liberating leadership. And I would just say, as I said to close, that liberating leadership is leadership that is the capacity of a community. It's the character of a community in which leaders find their way, in which leaders find their call. And so I want to point back to my own call story, that leadership was the confession of a community. That my home church was Trinity United Church of Christ. That said, there is no task more sacred than the liberation of Black people, and God has called us to this task. And because God had called us, God called me. And I'm grateful God did. And so my question to you is, how are you called? To whom are you called? To whom are you listening? Where are you reading from? And who are you reading with? God bless you.
Wow, is all I could say. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for your inspiring as well as challenging words to us pertaining this idea of liberating leadership as well as prophetic problem solving. We're going to take some questions from the chat, and I must reiterate, I am no Dr. McCorn, and I feel as though he is very, very, very much qualified to engage with you on this subject matter. But I want to start the questions, and if we have any to come in, we'll address those at the time. But I want to start with a question. What would be in today's way of keeping Rome accountable, as what you said, what would be your marching orders to our institution dealing with faculty, staff, and students? What would be your words to help us keep Rome accountable in this season?
What a question. What a question. John Dominic Crossan wrote a book called God and Empire. Subtitle is Jesus Against Rome, Then and Now. And so what would it mean to hold Rome accountable? I think we see glimpses of it all over the nation and indeed the world. And I would go as far as to say is that Rome, if we talk about Rome as a metaphor, Rome is not just government. Rome is a consciousness. Rome is an idea that's embedded in systems of white supremacy, in systems of patriarchy, in systems of heterosexism, that says in order for me to be tall, you got to be short.
Wow.
Right? In order for me to be able to have enough, I have to deprive you. Right? And ultimately what that comes from is a fundamental idea that somehow my life force is disconnected from yours. That somehow I can benefit as your life force is deprived. Right? That's the consciousness of Rome. It's an imperial consciousness. It's one that it has a endless void that must be fed, right? And that endless void is a void that exists on the lie of scarcity, that there is not enough for everybody. And I've got to hoard it. I've got to keep it. And my identity rests on your domination. That's Rome. Now, Rome shows up everywhere. Because listen, systems cannot sustain themselves unless they set up shop in your soul.
Wow.
And so it requires us to examine, how is Rome in me? Matter of fact, there's an economist who asked the question, even for those of us who claim to be about the work of justice and peace. He asked, how do we who call ourselves change agents keep reproducing the very results we say we don't want?
Talk about it.
That has everything to do with the fact that we have not done the level of internal listening and reimagining even ourselves in relationship to Rome to take stock of the fact and the extent to which we are colluding in our own oppression, right? So we can't let Rome off the hook, but our leverage point in resisting Rome is ourselves. That's our leverage point.
Wow. This is something that I would dare say should be taught everywhere. This is reminiscent for me of James Cone in his understanding of Jesus and justice and liberating theology. Do you feel that as an educator, do you feel the weight or heaviness that you must continue in some way as that torch has been passed, as you alluded to the Cape? Do you feel that heaviness in your position to make sure that you are, especially in this pandemic, still pushing and pressing this idea of prophetic problem solving? How does that look now as we are still kind of socially connected, but yet we're still disconnected in some way? How does that look now in education for you and the ITC family?
Well, I think the understatement of the year would be to say that pursuing this path is difficult, in part because it's countercultural, and it goes against some of the reflexes that we have generated over time that depends on single leaders for solutions, right? And what we have been working on, and what I desire is that we are no longer thinking about ourselves as torch bearers, right? I don't know if you remember the most recent Olympics when they bring the torch. It's a relay race, right? One person at a time. You take one leg, I take the next leg. You take one leg, I take the next leg. I want to suggest that to stamp out the darkness, you need more than a torch. You need a candlelight vigil where a whole community is holding light, right? Where we can light up a whole space together, not by one single torch, one at a time. Ultimately, that can be snuffed out. But what I'm hoping for, working at with our team at ITC is not just how we're shaping leaders, but even how we're shaping the institution to be a leader-full and a leader-rich institution that has practices and processes and even policies in place that take full advantage of the wealth of wisdom and leadership that exists in the whole ecology that our institution represents, right? And so from an organizational leadership perspective, that's not just about rhetoric, that's not just about what we say, that's also about how we even structure work. That has to do with the systems that we work with and in. That has to do with how we facilitate teams, how we facilitate meetings, where we believe knowledge is coming from. For example, when I first came on board in the role of president, one of the first things I did, and I've continued this practice, was I sat down with almost every member of the non-academic staff. When folks think about higher education, theological education, everybody thinks about the faculty first. But there's a whole non-academic staff that makes things go. And in order to understand what was going on in the institution when I arrived, I had to talk with folk who knew. I couldn't come in assuming that I knew everything that needed to be done. And that was a process of discovery and listening that gave us the insight to begin to make some of the important moves that we've made over the last couple of years, right? Now, COVID has made that much more difficult, and it's disrupted our need to recast and co-create a new culture. But we're working on ways of getting back into community to be able to facilitate the kind of conversation and connection that helps us to move in an alternative way.
Amen. Thank you for that. And I appreciate your candor and your transparency. Mm-hmm. We have our last question is going to come from Dr. McNeil in the chat. He asked, what is your vision of beloved community for people of color in this country? Mm-hmm. And where are pockets of beloved community happening that you honor? And who are the folk doing this work now?
Man, what great questions. Great questions. So let me answer the first by starting with the third question, or a second and third question about pockets of beloved community. And let me just say that beloved community and our attempts to co-create it are always experimental, right? Precisely because yesterday's solutions become today's challenges. And evil has a way of shape-shifting, right? If evil has a way of shape-shifting, we have to be agile enough to be able to rethink our thinking and re-strategize, right? And so I think it's important to highlight folk who are leading in that way. And just to say, my vision of beloved community is not a destination. It's more about process than product, right? So the first that comes to mind is my dear brother Heber Brown in Baltimore, Maryland, pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, and the founder of the Black Church Food Security Network. And we've partnered now with the Black Church Food Security Network to develop the Food and Land Security Institute at ITC. But what the Black Church Food Security Network, the way it started was Dr. Brown in what we might call a food desert, what we really know as food apartheid. Dr. Brown looked around his community and he saw in this community where there was food insecurity, he saw a fresh market, I believe, going up, and said, "Oh man, we finally get access to healthy produce." And he said when he finally went in and saw the price point on the food in the market, he said, "Oh, so we're no longer in a food desert. This is a food mirage because the people I serve can't gain access to the fresh produce in front of them." And so he went back to his church and not too long after began to look differently at the acreage that they sat on. He said, "You know what? We can grow food right here with what we have." And over the next year began to grow an extraordinary amount of fresh produce that was distributed to the community. Now, that began to spark imagination. You're not going to solve hunger with a garden, but you will spark imagination, right? And what began to happen was he began to network with the congregations in the area and begin to build relationships with farmers in the Mid-Atlantic region, Black farmers and Black congregations. So when the Freddie Gray uprising took place and Baltimore streets were shut down, in fact, the grocery stores were not bringing in produce. They had shut down their supply lines. Grocery store racks were empty. They activated Black farmers to bring produce, Black grown produce, to Black congregations as a distribution network and set up an alternative food system. If you love me, feed my sheep. An alternative food system for Black and brown folk in inner city Baltimore over the course of about 2 to 3 weeks. And it sparked their imagination. If we can do this for 2 weeks, we can do this in perpetuity, because we can look differently at what we do have, right? And use what we do have in community collaboratively for the benefit of our people, right? And they've been doing this work since that time. Black Church Food Security Network. I want to invite you to pay attention to that. That is an experiment in beloved community that gives us a way of reimagining the assets we already have and the assets we already are in service to the needs of God's people. So my vision of beloved community has to do with us thinking and looking differently at ourselves and co-creating, I would call them solutions, but I would more accurately say experiments of love that are not just about weak sentimentality, but are about being God's hands and feet, right? Making that provision, and in doing so, demonstrating worthiness, that fundamental idea that your life matters, right? And if your life matters, then your health matters. If your life matters, your children matter, right? If your life matters, your labor matters. And all of these things have everything to do with how we understand ourselves in relationship to our Creator, our community, and our creation. And it gives us an opportunity to reimagine all of that in service to what God intends for us.
Thank you so much, President Dr. Williams. We at Clinton College are deeply indebted to your prophetic message, your word, as well as your transparency and honesty. I must just, as a personal note, just say that the Robinson A. Musan Church, which I'm pleased to pastor, has partnered with the Black Church food scarcity. And so we are planting a garden on our acreage in order to address those very same concerns. And so thank you for bringing that to light and reiterating that, and that we all can play a part by first re-examining ourselves and our own thinking, as well as our own theology in order to work. Thank you so much. And I just want to sit down. I feel like I'm sitting at the feet. and I want to learn so much more.
Bless you,
But at this time, we have to go. And we much blessings to you and the ITC family. And thank you for this space and time. And we'll have our alma mater at this time. And thank you, Clinton family, for joining us on this day.
God bless you.
God bless you.
We